The desert sun shows no mercy, but the cruelty of a man is an even darker force. Clara Hayes learned this when her own husband Zane Cross sold her to settle a debt with the feared Apache Chief Talon. Clara was led away in chains, resigned to a life of hardship and brutality, expecting nothing but suffering. Yet the man who had bought her did not treat her as a captive. He kept her separate, guarded her closely, and protected her with a strange, silent intensity. Clara was his, but she wasn't. And as the chaos of the Arizona Territory unfolded, she would soon discover the terrifying secret behind why she was the only treasure he had. The air in the adobe trading post was thick with the smell of stale whiskey dust and Clara's quiet desperation. It was 1873, and the Arizona Territory was a harsh, unforgiving land, a place that swallowed the weak and made the strong cruel. Zane Cross, Clara thought as she wiped down a dusty glass, was a man among the weak. He had brought her to this isolated outpost just miles from the San Carlos reservation, with promises of wealth from government contracts and silver speculation. Those promises, like the cheap whiskey he sold, had turned sour. Zane was a man of empty smiles and rotten foundations, a gambler, a cheat, and now a man consumed by fear, making him even more dangerous. Clara was his wife, but the word felt hollow. She was his property, just another asset to be traded like his mule or his dwindling stock of flour. Her days were filled with enduring the leering gazes of prospectors, the harsh demands of soldiers from nearby Fort Thomas, and the cold, terrifying disdain of her husband. That morning, the air felt different. It was heavier, charged with unspoken dread. Zane hadn't spoken to her all morning. He just sat behind the counter, polishing a rifle he rarely used, his eyes darting nervously to the sun-scorched dirt patch outside the door. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice shaking. Clara froze, her hand still clutching the glass. "Who is she?" asked her voice tight. "Stay in the back. Don't say a word. Understand? Not one damn word." She knew exactly who he meant. The Apache. Zane had been trading with a band of Chiricahua Apache led by a chief named Talon. The soldiers at Fort Thomas called them hostiles. But this band had maintained a fragile peace, wary but proud, unwilling to tolerate fools. Zane, sure of his own cleverness, had been swindling them. He traded them flour, cut with sand, and sold them watered-down kerosene. Clara had warned him. "They're not stupid men, Zane," she'd pleaded. He slapped her for that, a harsh backhand that split her lip. "I know how to handle savages," he spat. Now it seemed the savages were coming to handle him. Just before noon they arrived, not with the whoops and gunfire Zane had feared, but in complete silence. The only sounds were the whispers of dust and leather. A dozen warriors mounted on lean, powerful ponies. They dismounted with military precision, moving with quiet economy. The man who entered the trading post first was tall for an Apache. He wore a simple breechcloth, stained moccasins, and a red cloth tied around his long black hair. This was Talon. His face was a mask of sharp lines and shadows, his eyes dark and piercing. He didn't look angry. He looked finished. Behind him stood his lieutenant, a broad-shouldered man named Griff, along with two other warriors. They didn't touch the merchandise. They simply stood, their presence filling the small space with an intimidating weight. "Miller," Talon said. His voice was a low rumble, his English clipped, but clear. Zane tried to smile. It was a grotesque, twitching grimace. "Talon, good to see you. I was just sorting some new blankets." "The finest wool," Zane added nervously. Talon's gaze swept the room, landing on Clara, who stood frozen by the back curtain. His look was brief, impassive, and then it returned to Zane. "The payment," Talon said. "Payment. Right, for the corn," Zane stammered. "I've got it right here." Zane fumbled under the counter, pulling out a small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the bar. It landed with a pathetic metallic clink. Griff stepped forward. picked up the pouch and emptied its contents into his hand. A few coins. Not nearly enough, Griff said, shaking his head. Talon didn't move. You think we are children? Talon asked in a tone that made the room feel even colder. No, Zane began to sweat. Business has been slow, Chief. The soldiers, they take all my stock. I need more time. Time is gone, Talon said. You sold rifles. Rifles that were not yours to sell. You sold them to Rafe Dalton. Clara gasped. She knew that name. Dalton was a former Confederate renegade, a bounty hunter and murderer who led a gang of ruthless cutthroats. They were rumored to be hiding in the Dragoon Mountains, wanted across multiple territories. Zane's blood drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. You took our gold, Talon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You promised us rifles from the fort. Instead, you took the gold and sold our rifles to Dalton. You steal from us and arm our enemies. This is your debt. I don't have it. Zane shrieked, his composure shattering. The gold is gone. Dalton took the rifles. He paid me nothing. I have nothing. You have nothing. Talon agreed. He looked around the barren store. The store is empty. Your horses are lame. You are nothing. Talon turned to leave. Zane, in a paroxysm of pure panic, lunged forward. Wait. I have something else. Something valuable. Talon paused, his back still to Zane. Zane, weeping, now his face slick with sweat, pointed a trembling finger at the back of the room. He pointed at his wife. Her, Zane choked out. Take her. Clara, she's strong. She can work. She's valuable. Worth more than any rifles. Clara felt the floor drop from under her. The dust in the air seemed to freeze. The world narrowed to the sight of her husband's shaking finger and the rigid, silent back of the Apache Chief. Talon turned slowly. He looked at Clara again. This time his gaze lingered. He wasn't looking at her face, but at her hands, her shoulders. He was assessing her like livestock. The humiliation burned hotter than any sun. You sell your wife, Talon said. It wasn't a question. It was a cold, hard fact. She's all I have left, Zane pleaded. Take her. The debt is paid. Just leave me be. Clara wanted to scream, to run, to scratch Zane's eyes out. But she was paralyzed by the betrayal. It was so complete, so absolute that it felt like death itself. Talon looked at Zane, then at Clara. He held her gaze for a long, unreadable moment. She saw no pity in his eyes. She saw no cruelty. She saw calculation. Finally, Talon gave a short, sharp nod to Griff. No, Clara whispered the word, barely a dry cough. Griff and another warrior moved toward her. She backed away, her back hitting the wall. She searched for a weapon, a bottle, anything. But Zane had already taken the rifle. Zane, please, she cried. Zane wouldn't look at her. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking with sobs that Clara knew weren't from remorse but from relief. Griff grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron. She fought, but it was useless. She was dragged out of the shadows of the store and into the harsh sunlight. They tied her hands in front of her with a leather thong. A horse was brought. They lifted her none too gently onto its back. She looked back one last time at the trading post. Zane stood in the doorway, his face pale and sweaty. He watched her go. He watched as the Apache warriors mounted up surrounding her and turned their horses toward the unforgiving mountains. He watched her be sold. The world dissolved into the brutal rhythm of the sun, the dust and the steady beat of the horses' hooves beneath her. Clara's journey to the Apache camp was a blur of misery. The leather thongs on her wrists rubbed her skin raw. The high desert sun beat down on her calico dress, offering no protection. She rode not as a person, but as cargo. The warriors around her rarely spoke. They communicated with short grunts and hand signals, their eyes constantly scanning the jagged horizon. They moved through the land not like men, but like extensions of the land itself, flowing through canyons and over ridges with terrifying ease. And mesmerizing. Talon rode at the front. He never looked back. Not once. Clara Hayes' initial terror had subsided, replaced by a deep, cold dread. She knew the stories. She had heard the settlers at Fort Thomas, their voices lowered, over whiskey, talking about what happened to white women taken by the Apache. The stories were full of fire and torment, and a fate that made a quick death seem like a blessing. Every time one of the warriors glanced her way, she flinched, expecting a blow or a curse. But the blows never came. The curses were never uttered. They offered her water from a skin, a gesture so practical it was almost disorienting. When she fumbled with the skin, her hands still bound, Griff watched her for a moment before letting out an impatient huff. He pulled his knife. Clara's heart stopped, and with a swift motion, he sliced the thong binding her wrists. She stared at her freed hands, the raw, bleeding marks left behind. He shoved the water skin back at her. She drank the lukewarm water, tasting of dust and leather. But it was life. He had cut her free, not out of kindness, Clara reasoned, but out of necessity. It was faster for her to drink on her own. She was, after all, property. One does not let valuable livestock die of thirst. They rode for 2 days, ascending from the scrubby desert floor into the high pine-choked canyons of the Chiricahua Mountains. The air grew cooler, the landscape more beautiful and more foreign. This was their land, the Apaches. Clara was an invader, a ghost in their world. Late on the second day, they entered the rancheria. It was nothing like the filthy camps Zane had described. It was hidden in a wide, grassy bowl protected on all sides by sheer rock faces and stands of ponderosa pine. A clear stream cut through the center. Dozens of wickiups domed huts made of branches and hides were scattered among the trees. The air smelled of pinyon smoke, roasting meat and horses. Their arrival brought the camp to life. Children stopped their games to stare, their black eyes wide with curiosity. Women paused their work, scraping hides, grinding corn in stone metodes to watch the procession. Their faces were not welcoming. Clara felt the weight of 100 hostile stares. She was the enemy, the white eyes a symbol of the people who had driven them from their lands. A wrinkled old woman, her face a map of fury, stepped forward as Griff helped Clara dismount. The woman who Clara would come to know as Raven spat on the ground at Clara's feet. She unleashed a torrent of harsh guttural Apache, her words dripping with venom. Griff said something sharp back to her, and the old woman fell silent. But her eyes never left Clara, glittering with pure, undiluted hatred. Clara stood alone, a pale figure in a world of brown skin and buckskin, waiting for her fate to be decided. Talon had dismounted and was already in a low, earnest conversation with several of the tribe's elders. He gestured not at Clara, but toward the direction from which they had come. He seemed to be explaining, arguing. He seemed burdened. After several minutes, he turned. He walked directly to Clara, and she braced herself. This was it. He would point to his lodge, and her life as a slave would begin. Instead, he stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, truly, looked at her, and his expression was one she could not decipher. It wasn't disdain, it wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. He spoke to one of the women who had been watching. This woman was younger, perhaps Clara's own age, with a strong, quiet face. Her name was Lozan. Talon spoke to her in low tones, and Lozan nodded. Lozan approached Clara and gestured for her to follow. Clara, confused, did as she was told. Lozan led her not to Talon's lodge, but to a small empty wickiup at the very edge of the camp. It was clean, but bare. A few rabbit fur blankets were piled in the corner. Lozan pointed at the blankets. "You sleep," she said, her English as clipped as Talon's. She then pointed at a basket of dried corn and a water skin. "You eat." Lozan turned to leave. "Wait," Clara said, her voice hoarse. What does he want, Talon?" Lozan paused, her hand on the hide flap of the doorway. She looked back at Clara, her expression unreadable. "He wants nothing," and then she was gone. Clara was left alone in the hut. She sat on the blankets, her mind reeling. This made no sense. She was not a wife. She was not a slave. She was a prisoner, but a prisoner left alone. Night fell. Clara Hayes could hear the sounds of the camp, the murmur of voices, the occasional cry of a baby, the stomp of horses' hooves. She was terrified to leave the hut. Later, she heard footsteps outside. Tension gripped her, and she pulled a blanket around herself. The hide flap of the doorway was pushed aside. It was Hawk. He didn't enter. He simply placed a bowl of warm stew just inside the doorway. The smell of venison and herbs filled the air. He stepped back and Clara crept to the door, peeking outside. Hawk wasn't leaving. He'd settled himself against a nearby pine tree, a rifle resting across his knees. He was guarding her. A cold realization washed over her. Talon hadn't put her in his bed. He hadn't put her to work scraping hides. He had put her in an empty hut, and he'd posted a guard. He wasn't protecting the camp from her. He was protecting her from the camp. The hatred in Raven's eyes flashed in her mind. Clara was a pariah, a target. For some reason, Talon didn't want her harmed. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't his slave. She was his treasure. Just as the name implied something to be locked away, kept separate and guarded. She was an object, a piece of property so valuable or dangerous, it couldn't be touched. Clara ate the stew, her first real meal in days. It was nourishing, but as she ate, she wept silent tears in the darkness. She had been sold by one man only to be locked away by another. Her life was still not her own. She was, in every way that mattered, utterly alone. The days in the rancheria stretched into a week, then two. Clara's life settled into a strange, suspended routine. She was the camp's ghost, a white-eye shadow living on the periphery of Apache life. Griff, or another warrior, was always posted near her wickiup. They weren't her jailers in the traditional sense. She was allowed to walk to the stream to wash, to sit in the sun outside her hut. But they were a constant silent reminder of her status. The other Apache, for the most part, simply pretended she didn't exist. They had a cultural aversion to speaking to or acknowledging someone who was clearly an outcast. Only Raven, the old woman, made her presence known, fixing Clara with a venomous stare whenever their paths crossed, occasionally muttering curses, just loud enough for Clara to hear. The one exception was Lozan. Lozan would appear at Clara's hut once a day, bringing food, flat corn cakes, rabbit stew, or roasted agave hearts. Lozan was quite reserved, but not unkind. One afternoon, Clara sat outside her wickiup, trying vainly to mend a tear in her dress with a crude bone needle and sinew. Lozan had left for her. Her fingers, unaccustomed to the work, were clumsy. Lozan approached and watched her for a moment. Clara, frustrated, dropped the dress. "It's difficult," Clara said, just to break the silence. Lozan sat on her haunches, picked up the dress, and took the needle. Her strong, deft fingers worked quickly and efficiently. She didn't look at Clara, but she spoke. "Why are you here?" Lozan asked. The question startled Clara. "I was sold. My husband. He sold me to Talon." Lozan stopped sewing. She looked up, her dark eyes searching Clara's. "Sold? Like a horse?" "Yes," Clara whispered. The shame burned in her throat. "Talon does not buy women," Lozan said flatly. She handed the mended dress back to Clara. "He has a wife. She is dead. His heart is dead with her. He does not buy women." Lozan left Clara to ponder this. The statement echoed in the hollow space of Clara's isolation. He does not buy women. Then what was she? Why had he taken her? Clara began to watch. From the edge of the camp, she watched Talon. He wasn't a tyrant. He was a leader burdened by an impossible situation. She saw him mediate disputes between families. She saw him training the young boys, teaching them to track with patience but firmness. And she saw the worry that etched new lines around his eyes. Scouts came and went, reporting on the movements of the soldiers, the white men. The reservation at San Carlos was a powder keg, and Talon was desperately trying to keep his people away from it to maintain their freedom in these mountains. His focus was entirely on his people's survival. He never once looked her way. This only deepened the mystery. If he was so consumed with his people, why burden himself with a hated white woman? A woman who, as Raven's glares proved, was a source of internal conflict for his band. The answer came as most secrets do in the dead of night. Clara Hayes couldn't sleep. The air was cold and the wind outside the wickiup whispered like ghosts. She needed water. Her guard for the night was a young warrior she didn't know, dozing by the dying embers of a small fire. Moving silently, her bare feet made no sound on the packed earth. Clara slipped out of the hut and made her way to the water skins she had left by the stream. The main camp was dark save for the flickering glow of the central council fire. As she crept back, she passed near the larger lodge where Talon met with his elders. Voices murmured from within. Talon and Hawk. Their tones were low, urgent. "Cannot keep her here," Hawk was saying in Apache. Clara had picked up a few words, and this one was clear. "The people are restless. Raven says she is a bad omen. She says the soldiers will follow. The soldiers are following." Talon's voice replied, heavy with exhaustion. "But not for her." There was a pause. "Miller," Talon said, and Clara's blood ran cold. He had switched to the broken English they used to discuss the white world. "Miller is the problem. He sold her. The debt is paid," Hawk said. "No." Talon's voice was sharp. "The debt was the rifles, the ones he sold to Rafe Dalton. I took the white woman, because Miller is a snake who hides in a different hole." Clara strained to understand. Miller hadn't just sold the rifles to Dalton. Talon continued. His voice was a low growl. "He owes Dalton more. Gold. From a card game. Dalton's men are looking for Miller. They would have taken his trading post apart. And her." Clara put her hand over her mouth. "Miller knew they were coming." Talon said, "He gave me the woman too, to make the debt public, to make me the target." Hawk was silent, processing this. "Think," Talon urged. "Miller tells the soldiers Talon stole my wife. The soldiers come. He tells Rafe Dalton, Talon has my wife. And your payment. Dalton comes. He sets the soldiers against the Apache and the renegades against us both. He hopes we destroy each other. In the chaos, Zane Cross disappears. The sheer cowardice of it stole Clara's breath. Zane hadn't just sold her to save himself. He had used her as bait to start a war that would cover his escape. "So," Hawk said, "we have the bait. We have the bait." Talon agreed grimly. "And Dalton is a wolf. He will not let the soldiers have his prize. He will come." "And Zane Cross," Talon said, "he is too stupid to know that Dalton will hunt him first." "What of the woman?" Hawk asked. "She is innocent," Talon said, and the words struck Clara like a physical blow. "She is nothing in this, but she is the piece on the board. Miller used her, but Dalton wants her now, not for debt, to sell, south in Sonora." Clara felt sick. She sank to the ground, the cold of the rock seeping into her. "We keep her safe," Talon said. "Not for her. For us, as long as we have her, we control where the battle happens. Dalton will come to us, and we will be ready. He will not come when Miller wishes. He will come when we are ready." Clara finally understood. She wasn't a treasure. She was a trap. She was being protected, not out of any sense of chivalry, but as a strategic asset. Talon was guarding her like a cache of ammunition, a vital piece of his plan to eliminate Rafe Dalton, the man who had armed his enemies and now hunted his people. Clara crept back to her wickiup, the dozing guard, none the wiser. She lay in the darkness, but she was no longer the weeping victim. The betrayal had burned away the last remnants of her old life. Zane Cross hadn't just sold her. He had condemned her to death, using Talon as the executioner. But Talon, in his cold, pragmatic way, had refused. He had taken her not to harm her, but to use her in his own war. She was a pawn, she thought, her hands clenching in the dark. But a pawn can still move. For the first time, she wasn't just afraid. She was angry, and she was on the side of the only man who, for his own reasons, was keeping her alive. While Clara Hayes was uncovering the truth in the mountains, Zane Cross was spinning his own tale. He had waited 2 days long enough for the tracks to cool and his own panic to settle, before he rode his mule hard into Fort Thomas. He didn't go to the sutler's store or the barracks. He went straight to the officer's quarters. He presented the perfect image of the grieving, violated husband. He tore his dusty hat off, his eyes wide and frantic, his voice cracking with rehearsed despair. "Lieutenant, thank God," he cried, stumbling toward the first officer he saw. Lieutenant Hank Carter was carved from the same bad stone as Zane, but with the polish of a uniform and a misplaced sense of righteous authority. He was young, ambitious, and profoundly arrogant. He'd been sent to this God-forsaken territory for a minor infraction back east, and he was desperate for a chance to earn a citation, to prove his worth and escape this sun-scorched exile. "Steady on, man." "What is it?" Carter asked, stepping back from Zane's sweat-stained shirt. "My wife, sir. My Clara." Zane choked out, letting a tear roll down his cheek. They took her." Carter's eyes sharpened. "Who took her?" "Talon." Zane spat the name like a curse. "That godless savage. He came to my store, said I owed him, and he just took her. Dragged her from our home. God knows what they're doing to her." This was it. This was the opportunity Carter had been praying for. Not a tedious patrol, not a mission to escort a payroll. A rescue. The rescue of a white woman from the clutches of a hostile chief. It was the kind of story that would get a man's name in the Army and Navy journals. Talon Carter repeated, testing the name. "His band is supposed to be peaceful." "Peaceful." Zane laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "They're animals, Lieutenant. He's a snake. He's been extorting me for months. And now my Clara. You have to save her. You have to. We will, Mr. Cross." "You have my word," Carter said, his chest swelling. He placed a hand on Zane's shoulder. "We'll bring your wife back, and we'll see this Talon hang." Within an hour, the fort was buzzing. Carter, overstepping his authority and barely consulting his captain, began requisitioning a full patrol. 20 men, the best horses and extra ammunition. He would ride out at dawn. Zane Cross, having planted his seed, slipped away from the fort. He didn't ride back to his empty trading post, but south toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. He arrived at a hidden box canyon late that night. A single fire burned. The men around it were not soldiers. They were hard-scarred men, rifles never out of arm's reach. This was Rafe Dalton's camp. "Look what the wind blew in," a voice drawled from the shadows. A large man emerged, his face mostly hidden by a thick, filthy beard. This was Dalton. "I've got news," Zane said, his voice no longer pleading, but thin and reedy. "You've got my gold cross or my rifles?" Dalton asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Better," Zane said, forcing a smile. "I know where your rifles are, and I've got a bonus for you." Dalton stepped closer, the firelight catching the coldness in his eyes. "You're a desperate man, Cross." "I don't like desperate men," Talon, Zane said. "The Apache Chief. He's the one who intercepted your shipment. He has your Spencers. He's got them cached in his rancheria up in the Chiricahua Mountains." Dalton's hand went to the large knife on his belt. "He stole from me." "Yes." Zane played his trump card. He also stole my wife. Took her right from my store. Dalton stared at him. Your wife? What in blazes do I care about your wife? Because Zane leaned in. Right now, a cavalry patrol from Fort Thomas is getting ready to ride out to Talon's camp to rescue Clara. They'll be riding at dawn. A slow, ugly smile spread across Rafe Dalton's face as he understood. A diversion, Frank said. Exactly. Zane Cross was animated now, his plans spilling out. The soldiers hit the camp. While the Apache are busy fighting them, you and your men slip in from the north. You know how the Apache fight, Frank continued. They'll have the women and supplies hidden. That's where the rifles will be. He licked his lips. My wife. Clara. She's a fine woman. She'd fetch a high price down in Sonora. A bonus for your trouble. Rafe considered this. A cavalry patrol to soak up the bullets while he stole the prize. It was a good plan. A coward's plan. But a good one. And what do you get, Cross? Rafe asked. My freedom, Zane said. You get the rifles. You get the woman. You get your revenge on Talons. The soldiers get a fight. Everyone is busy. And I'm just gone. I ride for California. You just have to give me a day's head start. That's all I ask. Rafe looked at the sniveling man. He had never intended to let Zane Cross live. This just made the job cleaner. You're a real piece of work, Cross, Rafe said, clapping him on the back hard enough to make Zane stumble. A real piece of work. All right. We ride at dawn. You'll guide us to the canyon. Zane Cross smiled, believing in his profound stupidity, that he had finally outsmarted everyone. He had set 3 factions on a collision course, the U.S. Army, the Apache, and the most ruthless gang in the territory. He didn't care who lived or died as long as he was the one who walked away. Back at Fort Thomas, Sheriff Hank Carter was polishing his saber, dreaming of glory. And in the rancheria, Talon was listening to his scouts. They had spotted 2 groups. One a column of blue-coated soldiers approaching from the east. The other a band of hard-faced white men coming from the south. The trap was set. But the bait, Clara, was about to be caught in the middle. The rancheria transformed. The peaceful domestic sounds of the camp were replaced by the sharp, urgent whispers of preparation. There was no panic. There was only focus. Women began packing supplies, dried meat, water, ammunition into bundles. Children were gathered, their usual play silenced by the gravity of the moment. The warriors, their faces painted, checked their rifles and bows. May Ford appeared at Clara's wickiup. She was no longer the quiet woman who brought corn cakes. She wore a warrior's cartridge belt, and a rifle was slung over her shoulder. Her expression was hard, resolute. They come, May said, tossing a bundle at Clara's feet. Water. Meat. You will run with the women. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Soldiers. Soldiers. May confirmed. And others. Dalton. So Zane's plan was in motion. The thought of Sheriff Carter and his rescue filled Clara with bitter, iron-laced dread. She knew what a rescue by soldiers meant. It meant gunfire chaos and the deaths of the very women and children she was now supposed to flee with. Raven, the old woman, appeared behind May. She pointed a gnarled finger at Clara, her voice a harsh rasp. She spoke in Apache, but her meaning was unmistakable. This is your fault. The white eyes come for the white eye. She says you are the sickness, May translated flatly. She's right, Clara whispered, shame and fear warring within her. They are coming for me. They come for the rifles, May corrected. And for any excuse to kill. You are the excuse. Now we go. May grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the northern edge of the camp where the other women and children were gathering, preparing to flee to pre-arranged hiding spots higher in the rocks. But then, Talon was there. He moved from the trees, a specter of war. He stopped in front of Clara Hayes. His gaze was intense, and for the first time he spoke directly to her as a person, not as an object. Your people come, Talon said. Clara looked at the chief, the man who had bought her to use as bait. She saw the weight of his people on his shoulders. "They are not my people," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Talon's eyes held hers. "The soldiers. You go to them. They will take you. You will be safe." At the fort, he was giving her a choice. She could run to Sheriff Hank Carter's patrol. She could claim to be the captive and be rescued. It was the way out. It was the way back to the white world. A world where Zane Cross, her husband, had sold her like cattle. A world where men like Carter saw her as a prize to be won, a justification for a massacre. She looked past Talon at Raven, whose face was a mask of hatred. She looked at May Ford, who held a rifle and stood ready to fight for her home. "If I go to them," Clara said, her voice finding a strength she never knew she possessed, "they will not stop shooting. They will rescue me, and they will kill you all for resisting." She met Raven's glare. She is right. As long as I am here, I am their excuse. Talon watched her, his expression unreadable. "I will not be their excuse," Clara said, "and I will not go with them." She looked at May. "I will go with you. Where do we hide?" A flicker of surprise passed through Talon's eyes. Raven let out a grunt of disbelief. Talon nodded once. "Go, Dopago, go." May grabbed Clara's arm again, but this time it wasn't a pull. It was an acceptance. "This way, we must be fast." They scrambled up a narrow game trail, climbing into the rocks above the rancheria. They joined a dozen other women and children in a shallow cave screened by thick brush. From here they had a terrifying clear view of the camp below. The first shots echoed through the canyon. Sheriff Hank Carter, predictable and arrogant, had charged straight into the valley. "Fools," May whispered. Her knuckles were white on her rifle. The rancheria appeared deserted. Carter, believing the Apache had fled, allowed his men to dismount and search the wickiups. It was then that Talon's trap was sprung. Warriors hidden in the rocks above the soldiers opened fire. The canyon exploded into a deafening cacophony of gunfire and screams. Horses panicked. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Their disciplined lines shattered. It was an ambush. Perfectly executed, Carter's rescue had turned into a fight for survival. Clara watched, her stomach churning. She saw soldiers fall. She saw Apache warriors fall. It was brutal, bloody, and pointless. Then from the other side of the canyon, the north ridge, a new group of men appeared. They were not wearing blue. They were ragged, bearded men. Rafe Dalton's gang. "Now," May breathed. But Dalton's men were not charging down to join the fight. They were moving toward the caves, toward the women. "They are not here for the fight," May said, her voice tight with sudden fear. "They are here for us." Clara understood. Zane's plan. While Talon fought the soldiers, Dalton would steal the rifles and the women. The main Apache force was pinned down, engaged with Carter's patrol. Only a few older warriors and the women themselves were left to defend the hiding spots. Dalton and 5 of his men, guided by Zane Cross, crashed through the brush. Zane was lagging behind, his face pale, a revolver clutched in his sweaty hand. "In here," Dalton bellowed, spotting the cave. May raised her rifle and fired. One of Dalton's men dropped. "Get him!" Dalton roared, firing his pistol into the darkness of the cave. Clara screamed as chips of rock exploded near her head. The children were crying. It was chaos. Raven, the old woman who hated Clara, suddenly shrieked. It was not a cry of fear, but of pure rage. Zane Cross, emboldened by the attack, had moved toward the bundles of supplies, looking for the rifles. He was just outside the cave. Raven lunged from the shadows. She was impossibly fast for a woman her age, and in her hand was a skinning knife. Zane Cross turned his eyes wide. He didn't even have time to raise his pistol. Raven plunged the knife deep into his chest. Zane looked down at the hilt sticking out of his stained shirt. He made a small gurgling sound, his eyes widening with a final, pathetic surprise. Then he collapsed, his grand plan dying with him, in the dust of Arizona. Clara Hayes stared breathless. Zane Cross was dead. "Clara!" Rafe Dalton's voice bellowed. He had seen his guide fall. He was furious. He shoved his way into the cave, a massive, terrifying figure. "You Cross's wife! You're coming with me!" He lunged for Clara, but May Ford was there. She swung her rifle like a club, cracking Dalton across the jaw. He roared in pain, but grabbed the rifle, tearing it from her grip. He raised his pistol to her head. At that moment, Raven, having pulled her knife free from Zane, lunged again, this time at Dalton, screaming her war cry. Dalton turned startled and fired. The bullet struck Raven in the chest. She felt her momentum carrying her forward, her arms wrapping around Dalton's legs. "Get off me, you old witch!" he roared, trying to kick her free. That single vital second was all Talon needed. He appeared at the mouth of the cave, his face a mask of fury. He had seen the second attack and had broken away from the main fight. He held no rifle, only a long, heavy war lance. Dalton looked up, his eyes widening in terror. He never had a chance to fire. Talon drove the lance forward with all his strength. The steel point punched through Dalton's chest with a sickening wet sound. Dalton stared at Talon, his mouth open, then fell backward, pulling the lance with him dead. The canyon fell utterly silent for a split second. The silence that followed the deaths of Zane Cross and Rafe Dalton was a vacuum. A surreal pause in the storm. Below, the battle still raged. Sheriff Hank Carter, his patrol decimated and his arrogance shattered, was now fighting a desperate retreat. He had no idea that the prize he had come to rescue was in a cave just 100 yards away, or that the true, darker plot had just reached its bloody conclusion. Talon stood at the mouth of the cave, breathing heavily. He was silhouetted against the bright, indifferent sky. He ripped his lance free from Dalton's body with a savage pull, his eyes scanning the rocks for any more of Dalton's men. But they had seen their leader fall, and they had seen the man who did it. They were scattering, melting back into the rocks, wanting no part of this place. Clara's senses returned in a flood. The smell of gunpowder and blood, the screaming of the children huddled in the back of the cave, the sound of labored, wet breathing. Raven. Clara scrambled across the cave floor to the old woman's side. May Ford was already there, cradling Raven's head in her lap. The old woman's eyes were open, but they were dulling. The front of her buckskin dress was soaked in dark blood. "Raven," May whispered, tears streaming down her face. She spoke in a patchy, soft voice, her words pleading. Raven's gaze moved unfocused and landed on Clara. The hatred was gone, replaced by a pained, weary understanding. She raised a trembling hand and touched Clara's cheek. Her fingers were sticky with her own blood. She spoke, her voice a reedy whisper, under white eye. "Do not speak," May choked out. Raven's grip tightened on Clara's dress. She looked at May and then back to Clara. She said something. "What?" Clara asked, leaning closer. "What is she saying?" May translated, her voice breaking. "She had a daughter taken by the soldiers from San Carlos. They said she was stolen by a white traitor. They went to rescue her. The traitor, he fought the soldiers and shot. They killed her. Her daughter." Clara closed her eyes, the horror of it settling over her like a shroud. Raven hadn't just hated her for being white. She had looked at Clara and seen the same lie, the same excuse that had cost her everything. The soldiers rescuing a woman who didn't want to be rescued had murdered her child. "She says," May's voice cracked with a sob, "she says I did not let them take another." Raven's hand fell from Clara Hayes' cheek. Her eyes stared unseeing at the roof of the cave. She was gone. May Ford bowed her head and let out a single piercing cry of grief, a sound so profound, so raw, that it cut through the distant sounds of the battle. Clara, numb, placed her hand on May's shoulder. She had no words. She could only feel the weight of terrible grief. Raven, the woman who had spat at her, had died protecting her. She had died protecting May. She had died fighting the ghosts of her past. Talon entered the cave. He looked at the bodies of Rafe Dalton and Zane Cross, his expression cold. Then he looked at Raven, and his face softened into a deep, painful sorrow. He spoke gently to May, who nodded, her body still shaking. Griff appeared at the mouth of the cave. "The soldiers are in full retreat. They're running." "They've left 6 dead," Talon said, his voice grim. "Let them run. We've lost Raven and Kyle. The cost was high. The victory feels like ashes." Talon turned his attention to Clara. She was still kneeling by Raven's body, her dress stained with the old woman's blood. Clara looked up at him. Her eyes, empty of fear, filled only with a vast, cold exhaustion. "It is finished," Talon said. Clara looked at the body of her husband, Zane Cross. He lay in a heap, his mouth agape, his final expression one of disbelief. He was just a man, a weak, pathetic man, whose cowardice had cost so many lives. She felt nothing for him. No sorrow, no anger, just a profound, hollow emptiness. "Yes," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "It is finished." Talon looked at Zane's body. "He was your husband." "He was the man who sold me?" Clara corrected. "He was the man who set this fire, hoping we would all burn in it." Talon held her gaze. The power dynamic between them had shattered. She was no longer his property, his bait. She was a survivor. She was a witness. "We will take care of our dead," Talon said, his voice heavy. He gestured to Raven's body. "May will take you from this place." "Where?" Clara asked. She had nowhere to go. "Away from this. For now," he replied. May, with Clara's help, gently carried Raven's body from the cave. The women and children emerged, blinking in the daylight, their faces smeared with tears and dust. The battle was over. The canyon was quiet, save for the sounds of mourning. Clara looked back at the cave, at the body of Zane Cross, at the body of Rafe Dalton. The 2 men who had defined her life through their cruelty and greed, now just cooling meat on a stone floor. She turned away and followed May. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if she was a prisoner, or a guest, an enemy, or something else. The world she had known was gone, burned away in the heat of the canyon. The only thing she knew for certain was that the woman who had been dragged from the trading post 2 weeks ago was dead, just as surely as Zane Cross was. A new, harder and strangely stronger person stood in her place. The rancheria was a place of mourning. A heavy blanket of sorrow settled over the camp as Raven and the warrior Kyle were prepared for their burial rites. The bodies of Zane Cross, Rafe Dalton, and the other renegades were dragged far from the camp and left for the vulture's brutal but earned ends. Sheriff Hank Carter's patrol limped back to Fort Thomas with a story of disastrous defeat. To save his career, Carter reported an ambush by a vastly superior force, cementing Talon's reputation as a dangerous enemy and ensuring the soldiers would not be quick to return. Clara was once again in her wickiup, but this time there was no guard. On the second day, May came to her. She didn't bring food. She just sat with Clara, sharing a silent space of grief. "Raven," May said finally, "she was my mother's sister. She was hard because life was hard. Her heart was broken by the years, but she died a warrior. She saved me." "She saved us," May corrected. "She saved her people. In that moment you were one of her people." The words hung in the air. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Am I free to go?" "Where will you go?" May asked simply. "To the fort. They will not see you as Clara Hayes. They will see you as the woman who lived with the Apache. You will have no home there." Clara knew it was true. The white world, her old world, had no place for her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Talon will speak to you?" May Ford said, standing. "He is finished with the rites." That evening, Talon came. He stood outside her wickiup, silhouetted against the twilight sky. He was no longer the terrifying chief or the cold strategist, but a man tired and burdened with leadership. "Mrs. Cross," he said. "I'm just Clara," she replied, stepping into the cool air. "Your husband is dead," Talon stated. "The debt is paid. The men who hunted you are dead. You are not my prisoner." "I know." Clara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "I offer you a choice," Talon said. "The soldiers will come back. Not today, but they will come, and with new anger. It is not safe for you here." He pointed south. "Tucson is a long ride. You can disappear there. I will give you a horse and food. You can find a new life among your people." Clara looked south. A new life. It sounded empty, haunted. "What's the other choice?" she asked. Talon turned his gaze back to the rancheria, where the fires now burned. "Or you stay." The offer shocked her. "Stay. Here, but I am a white eye." "Raven died for you," Talon counted. "May sits with you. You had a choice in that cave. You could have run to the soldiers. You chose to stand with us. You chose a side." He was right. She had. "It will not be an easy life," he warned. "We are hunted. You will work. You will be hungry. You will never be Apache. But you will be one of us. You will have a place." Clara thought of Zane. She thought of the safety of Fort Thomas, a world that was a lie. This was real. "I cannot be Clara Hayes anymore," she whispered. "No," Talon agreed. "She is dead." Clara took a deep breath. The cold pine-scented air felt like the first clean breath of her life. "I will stay." Talon nodded once, a simple, profound gesture of acceptance. He turned and walked away. His part in her story was finished. Clara left the wiki up, leaving her old life in its shadows. She walked toward the central fire, toward May. May saw her coming and read the decision in her eyes. A small, slow smile touched her lips. She handed Clara a bowl of stew. Clara sat by the fire among the Apache. She was not a captive, not a treasure, not a prisoner. May watched her. "We must give you a new name," she said. "A name for this new life. We will call you Zidis Taza." "What does it mean?" Clara asked. "It means," May said, her gaze fixed on the fire, "she who endured." Clara held the bowl, the warmth seeping into her skin. She had been sold, hunted, and had survived. She looked into the flames, and for the first time saw a beginning. That was the story of Clara Hayes, the woman sold to a chief who found her true self in the last place she ever expected. Her life was not one of ease, but of purpose. She never returned to the white world, living out her days with the people who had shown her the true meaning of strength and sacrifice. What did you think of Clara's impossible choice? The real-life stories of the Old West are often more complex and heartbreaking than any fiction. They are stories of survival, betrayal, and unexpected courage. If you were moved by Clara's journey and her transformation, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves history and drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that you won't find in the history books. Let us know in the comments what story you want to hear next. Thank you for listening. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deep-fake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work